They escorted me out of the company I founded with a hulking security guard and pitying glances like I'd just dropped a sandwich. But what they didn't know, I had lived in my car for 11 months to build this company. And I'd hidden a clause that would later turn me into their legal nightmare. My name is Madeline Rivers, Mads to everyone who knows me. At 32, I've already lived several lifetimes in the tech world. This is the story of how I lost everything I built, and then took it all back with a single dollar. 9 years ago, I wasn't the polished businesswoman you might imagine. I was sleeping in a blue 2008 Honda Odyssey minivan with a cracked windshield and more empty coffee cups than I care to admit. Home was wherever I could find free Wi-Fi and a bathroom, usually the Nashville Public Library parking lot or behind a 24-hour diner where the night manager looked the other way. I'd graduated with honors in computational linguistics and natural language processing from Vanderbilt. But the recession had hit hard, and my student loans hit harder. Traditional jobs weren't panning out, but I had an idea, an obsession, really, that wouldn't let me go. People had been trying to make machines understand human emotion for decades, but they always approached it from the wrong angle. They tried to categorize words into neat buckets: positive, negative, neutral. Missing all the nuance, I knew there was a better way. Not just analyzing what people said, but how they said it. The patterns between words, the shifts in tone, the things left unsaid. That rainy Tuesday night in October is etched into my memory. I was parked behind the East Branch Library, laptop balanced on my knees, eating a cold bean burrito while debugging my latest algorithm. The library had closed hours ago, but their Wi-Fi signal reached just far enough. Rain hammered on the roof of the van, and I had a towel draped over the window to catch the leak above the driver's seat. "Come on, you stubborn piece of garbage," I muttered, hunting for the error in my code. My program kept misinterpreting customer service emails, flagging satisfied customers as angry and missing the truly furious ones completely. Then it hit me. I was treating each email as an isolated event, but human emotions aren't isolated. They're connected to previous interactions, to time of day, to the number of exchanges that came before. I frantically rewrote the algorithm, adding temporal and contextual variables, weighting recent interactions more heavily. At 3:27 a.m., I ran the test set again. My hands were shaking from the cold and too much cheap coffee as I watched the results populate. 87% accuracy, then 91%, then 94%. I stared at the screen, not quite believing what I was seeing. The previous state-of-the-art system topped out at 78%. I remember laughing until I cried, the sound echoing in the empty van. This wasn't just an incremental improvement, it was a breakthrough. My algorithm wasn't just detecting emotions, it was predicting them, forecasting customer satisfaction issues before they exploded. At that moment, there was no company, just me, my cracked laptop, and a dream bigger than the cramped minivan I called home. I named the system EmotiSense, though I'd later come to hate that name when the marketing team got their hands on it. For now, it was mine. My ticket out of homelessness. My chance to build something that mattered. The next morning, I cleaned up in the library bathroom, changed into my one presentable outfit, and started cold calling local businesses. Would you like to know what your customers are really feeling before they tell you? Most hung up, some laughed, a few asked for demos. I built primitive dashboards for each client, custom-coded in all-night sessions, running on little more than determination and gas station energy drinks. My first paying customer was a local restaurant chain with notoriously bad Yelp reviews. They couldn't understand why customers left happy but reviewed angry. EmotiSense parsed their customer feedback emails and found the pattern. Their food was excellent, but their to-go packaging leaked, ruining the experience after customers got home. One simple fix later, their ratings began climbing. They paid me $500, which felt like winning the lottery. I treated myself to a motel room for 2 nights, my first real bed in months, and a proper shower. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. A small marketing agency signed on, then a regional bank. I started making enough to rent a tiny studio apartment, nothing fancy. But it had a shower and a real bed. I hired my first employee, a brilliant computer science student named Ava Chen, who I'd met at a hackathon. She became my right hand, improving the algorithm while I handled the business side. The turning point came unexpectedly. A national fast food chain was blindsided by a PR crisis when they changed their signature sauce. EmotiSense had flagged the brewing disaster weeks earlier in their customer feedback data, showing a pattern of discontent that their internal systems missed completely. A business reporter got wind of it and mentioned us in an article about predictive analytics. The video that followed, a side-by-side comparison of EmotiSense's predictions versus traditional sentiment analysis, went viral in tech circles. Suddenly, my inbox was flooded with inquiries, including one from Strataspark Ventures, a mid-sized venture capital firm specializing in AI startups. Their initial email was casual, almost dismissive. Interesting concept. We'd like to discuss potential synergies. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. But when you've lived in your car, eaten cold food for months, and put everything you have into a dream, validation from established players feels like oxygen. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at their sleek downtown offices, all glass and brushed steel, with a view of the Cumberland River that made my cheap apartment feel even shabbier by comparison. I spent a week preparing my pitch, rehearsing with Ava until we could recite our growth projections in our sleep. I remember stepping off the elevator, my one decent blazer freshly dry cleaned, clutching a portfolio of user testimonials and performance metrics. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where 3 people waited: Raymond Ellis, Strataspark's founding partner, Colin Whitaker, a financial executive they'd brought in, and Sabrina Moss, a marketing specialist known for her work with emerging tech brands. "Madeline, welcome," Raymond said, not getting up from his chair. "We've been looking at your little project with interest." Little project, as if 11 months in a van and 2 years of 70-hour weeks was a hobby. Colin flipped through my materials with manicured fingers. "The tech looks promising, if unrefined. What's your scale-up strategy?" I launched into my pitch, explaining how EmotiSense could transform customer experience management across industries. The algorithm could identify emotional patterns in text that humans often missed, predicting customer churn before traditional metrics showed any warning signs. Sabrina interrupted halfway through. "The name needs work. EmotiSense sounds like a teen mood ring. We'd need to reposition entirely." I swallowed my pride. The name is flexible. The technology is what matters. The meeting shifted from my pitch to their vision, how they could professionalize my operation, bring in enterprise clients, create a proper management structure. They talked about me in the third person while I sat right there. "She's clearly talented on the technical side," Raymond said to Colin, "but we'd need to build a proper executive team around her." By the time I left, I had a verbal offer. Strataspark would acquire EmotiSense, inject $2 million in capital, and build out a full team. I would remain as Chief Strategy Officer, focusing on product development while experienced business leaders handled the growth. The catch? The initial buyout was insultingly low, just enough to pay off my debts and provide a modest cushion. The real value would come from my equity stake in the new, restructured company, which would vest over 4 years. I spent a sleepless night weighing my options. EmotiSense was growing, but slowly. We needed capital to compete with bigger players who were noticing the space. Going it alone meant risking everything I'd built. The next morning, I called my old college roommate, Max Holloway, who'd become a corporate attorney. Over coffee at a diner that I could barely afford, I showed him Strataspark's term sheet. "This is highway robbery," he said bluntly, circling multiple clauses with a red pen. "They're taking controlling interest, diluting your shares aggressively. And these performance metrics for your equity vesting are nearly impossible to hit." I slumped in my seat. "So I walk away." Max studied me over his glasses. "Not necessarily. Let's get creative." For the next week, Max and I strategized. He helped me draft a counterproposal that seemed, on the surface, to give Strataspark what they wanted while protecting my interests in ways they might overlook. The key was a seemingly insignificant clause buried in the fine print of the acquisition agreement. Clause 9C stated that in the event of termination without cause, I would have the right to repurchase all intellectual property and assets of the original EmotiSense entity at the initial sale price. It seemed reasonable, a founder protection clause that many would see as a symbolic gesture given the nominal initial payment. When we met again with Stratus Park, Raymond skimmed the updated agreement with visible impatience. "Most of this works," he said, "but we can't accept this 4-year guaranteed employment term." I nodded, having anticipated this objection. "I understand your concerns. Let's remove that clause." They didn't notice that by removing the employment guarantee, they'd actually strengthened my position on Clause 9C, which now stood unopposed in the document. Without the employment term, any termination could potentially trigger my repurchase rights. The final deal was structured strangely. Stratus Park would acquire EmotiSense for the symbolic sum of $1, with the real value coming from their capital investment and my equity stake in the new corporate entity. Stratuspark Analytics. The original EmotiSense LLC would remain as a shell holding the core intellectual property, which would be licensed to the new company. To anyone not paying attention to the legal minutiae, it looked like a standard acquisition. To Max and me, it was insurance. "They think they're getting a bargain," Max said as we signed the paperwork. "Let's hope they never give you reason to use this." I framed that dollar bill from the acquisition, my first and only investment round, and hung it on the wall of my new office at Stratuspark Analytics. Everyone thought it was a cute founder sentiment. Only Max and I knew it might someday be the most important dollar I ever earned. The first 6 months were exhilarating. With proper funding, EmotiSense, now rebranded as Empathic Intelligence Platform, expanded rapidly. We moved into proper offices in a renovated warehouse downtown. I hired 4 more engineers, including bringing back Ava as lead data scientist. Our client list grew to include national retailers and financial services companies. Colin took the CEO role, bringing corporate polish and connections that admittedly opened doors I couldn't have accessed alone. Sabrina revamped our branding with sleek, minimalist design that looked professional, if somewhat soulless compared to our scrappy original aesthetic. But cracks appeared quickly. In strategy meetings, my technical explanations were increasingly met with glazed eyes or interruptions. "Let's focus on marketable features, not technical details," became Colin's refrain. Clients don't care how the sausage is made. Except they did. Our early clients had chosen us precisely because they understood and valued the technical innovation. Now, sales materials increasingly emphasize style over substance, reducing complex emotional intelligence algorithms to colorful bubbles and cartoon faces on slides. The first major clash came 8 months in, when Sabrina unveiled the new face of the platform, an animated character called Blinky, with wide eyes and a perpetual smile. "Research shows users connect better with anthropomorphized interfaces," she explained as Blinky bounced across the screen in a demo. "We're making emotional intelligence friendly and approachable." I couldn't hide my horror. "We're not selling a children's app. We're providing sophisticated emotional analytics to enterprise clients." Colin stepped in smoothly. "Mads, this is precisely why we brought in experts. You're brilliant with algorithms, but Sabrina understands how to make technology accessible." The patronizing tone made my stomach turn, but I swallowed my objections. This was business, I told myself. Compromise was necessary for growth. Gradually, I found myself marginalized in my own company. Important meetings were scheduled when I had standing commitments with the engineering team. My suggestions were noted but rarely implemented. The core algorithm, my algorithm, was increasingly treated as a black box to be packaged rather than improved. The engineering team felt it too. Within a year, 3 of our original developers had left, frustrated by the growing disconnect between technical excellence and market positioning. Ava stayed loyal, but I could see her enthusiasm waning as frivolous feature requests took precedence over meaningful improvements. "They're turning it into a toy," she told me one late night as we worked on maintaining the algorithm while the marketing team slept. All these animated reactions and emoji outputs. They're missing the whole point of what makes this technology revolutionary. I couldn't disagree, but I was trapped by golden handcuffs. My equity was still vesting. Walking away meant losing everything I'd built. So I compartmentalized, focusing on maintaining the technical integrity of the system while the company's external face became increasingly divorced from its core value. The real wake-up call came 18 months after the acquisition. I was scheduled to speak at Tech Forward, a major industry conference where I'd presented our early research the previous year. The night before, Colin casually mentioned that he would be delivering the keynote instead. "We need to present a unified executive vision," he explained. "You're still listed as an inspirational foundation. That's a compliment." Mads? Inspirational foundation. The phrase echoed in my head all night. I was being erased from my own creation story, relegated to a footnote. The next day, I sat in the audience and watched Colin present my life's work as if it had sprung fully formed from Stratuspark's collective genius. My name appeared on a single slide, misspelled as Madison Rivers, alongside a dozen other team members. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, thinking about how far we'd drifted from the original vision. EmotiSense had been built to help organizations understand human emotions with unprecedented nuance. Now it was being marketed as a simplistic customer satisfaction tool with cartoon mascots and dumbed-down metrics. I pulled out the acquisition agreement, reading it carefully for the first time in months. Clause 9C was still there, untouched and potent. I wondered if it would ever come to that, if they would ever give me reason to invoke it. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 weeks after the conference, I received a calendar invitation for a meeting with HR and Colin. No agenda, no explanation. The timing was suspicious, coming just days after I'd sent a detailed email to the board expressing concerns about the product roadmap's drift from our core technological strengths. I called Max immediately. "This feels like a setup," I told him. "Should I be worried?" "Possibly," he said cautiously. "Have you documented your concerns about the product direction?" "Extensively, emails, meeting notes, formal proposals, all ignored or dismissed." "Good. Forward everything to me. And Mads? If this is heading where I think it is, don't sign anything in that meeting, not even an acknowledgement of attendance. Say you need to review with counsel." I spent the night preparing, gathering evidence of my contributions and the gradual sidelining I'd experienced. I made copies of key documents, backed up emails, and took screenshots of system commits showing my ongoing contributions to the codebase. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in a small conference room we rarely used, not Colin's office or our main meeting space. That detail alone confirmed my suspicions. This was designed to be quick and clinical, away from curious eyes. I arrived 5 minutes early to find Colin already seated with Diana from HR, and a woman I didn't recognize who was introduced as counsel for the company. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral as I took a seat across from them. "Madeline," Colin began, using my full name, another bad sign. "We need to discuss your role at Stratuspark Analytics." What followed was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. My vision no longer aligned with the company's direction. I had communication challenges with the executive team. There were concerns about my ability to collaborate effectively in a scaled organization. Not once did they say the words terminated or fired. Instead, they presented a transition plan that would have me exit the company within 2 weeks, with a severance package contingent on signing a non-disparagement agreement and waiving any claims against the company. I listened silently, feeling a strange calm descend. This moment, this exact scenario, was what Max and I had prepared for almost 2 years earlier. "I'll need to review these documents with my attorney," I said finally, not touching the folder they'd pushed toward me. "This is a generous package, Madeline," Diana said with practiced sympathy. "The board has been very fair." "I'm sure they believe that," I replied, standing up. "I'll be in touch after consulting with counsel." Colin's expression hardened. "We'll need an answer by Friday. The company needs to move forward." I nodded and turned to leave. but was stopped by the appearance of a security guard at the door, a man I'd never seen before in our building. Standard protocol for executive transitions, Diana explained smoothly. Kyle will escort you to collect your personal items and then to the exit. So this was how it ended, treated like a potential threat in the company I'd created. Kyle followed me to my office, standing uncomfortably close as I packed photos, books, and a few small mementos into a cardboard box. My laptop and phone, company property, were already missing from my desk. Ava appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. What's happening? Why is there security? Ask Colin, I said, loud enough for Kyle and anyone nearby to hear. Apparently, I'm a transition now. The walk to the elevator was excruciating. Colleagues stared or averted their eyes, unsure how to react to the spectacle of a founder being marched out. In the lobby, a receptionist I'd hired personally looked down at her keyboard as I passed. Outside, the bright spring sunshine felt like an insult. Kyle stood awkwardly by the door as I adjusted my grip on the box. Do you need help getting to your car? He asked, seeming uncomfortable with his role in this drama. No, thank you, I replied with as much dignity as I could muster. I've carried heavier things further. He nodded and retreated inside, leaving me alone on the sidewalk of the company I'd built from nothing. I didn't cry until I reached my car, not from sadness, but from pure, incandescent rage. They thought they could discard me like an outdated feature, escort me out like a criminal, and continue profiting from my life's work. They had no idea what was coming. I drove straight to Max's office, the box of belongings still on my passenger seat. His assistant took one look at my face and ushered me directly into his office, closing the door behind me. Max stood up immediately. They did it. I nodded, dropping into a chair. Full corporate execution, security escort, and everything. He let out a low whistle. Faster than I expected. Did you sign anything? Not a thing. Told them I'd review with counsel. A slow smile spread across Max's face. Then it's time to activate our contingency plan. That night, I barely slept, alternating between moments of doubt and surges of determination. Was I really going to do this? Challenge a well-funded company with a team of corporate lawyers? Part of me wanted to take the severance, lick my wounds, and start something new. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kyle the security guard standing over me, colleagues averting their gaze, and Colin's smug certainty that I would quietly disappear. I saw my algorithm, built during homeless months, refined through countless sleepless nights, reduced to a cartoon character with blinking eyes. No, I wouldn't let them take this from me. The next morning, I met with Max again. He'd spent the night reviewing our options and preparing documentation. They made a critical error, he explained, spreading papers across his desk. They terminated you without cause, no performance improvement plan, no documented warnings, and more importantly, they never properly consolidated the corporate structure. I leaned forward. What do you mean? The original acquisition was structured with EmotiSense LLC, licensing its intellectual property to Strataspark Analytics. They set it up that way for tax purposes, but it means the original entity, where Clause 9C lives, is still legally valid. My pulse quickened. So I can actually enforce it? Not only can you enforce it, but they've given us perfect grounds. Their own termination documentation states they're ending your relationship due to strategic differences, not misconduct or cause. This triggers your right to repurchase. I stared at the papers, hardly daring to believe it could be this straightforward. They'll fight it. Of course they will. Max agreed. But the documentation is clear. We file the repurchase notice immediately, deposit the dollar with the court if necessary, and then we fight for an injunction preventing them from using the technology while ownership is disputed. That would cripple their business. Precisely. They'll have to settle, either by bringing you back with real authority or by paying you what the technology is actually worth, not the symbolic dollar they acquired it for. I took a deep breath. Let's do it. The following morning, a courier delivered a letter to Strataspark Analytics headquarters. Inside was a cashier's check for $1. a formal notice of my intent to exercise my repurchase rights under Clause 9C, and a demand that all use of the EmotiSense intellectual property cease immediately pending resolution of ownership. Colin called within an hour, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. This is absurd, Madeline. That clause was never intended for this situation. Yet here we are, I replied calmly. The language is quite clear. Our legal team says it's unenforceable. You can't possibly think you can reclaim a $100 million company for $1. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm not claiming Stratuspark Analytics. I'm exercising my right to reclaim EmotiSense LLC and its intellectual property, which your company uses under license. A license that, according to our agreement, terminates automatically upon my valid exercise of Clause 9C. Silence stretched across the line. You should have just taken the severance package, he said finally. This will get ugly. It already got ugly when you had security escort me out of my own company. Colin, I'm just finishing what you started. The following weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers. Stratuspark filed for an emergency injunction to prevent the enforcement of Clause 9C, arguing it was never intended to allow a founder to reclaim valuable IP after the company had invested millions in development. Our counter-argument was simple. The clause meant exactly what it said. And if Stratuspark's legal team had failed to understand its implications, that was their mistake, not mine. The company had structured the deal this way for their own tax and liability advantages. They couldn't now claim it was unfair when those same structures worked against them. While the legal battle began, I worked on another front. I reached out to Ava, who had resigned the day after my termination in protest. Together, we contacted the original engineering team, most of whom had left as the company's direction shifted away from technical excellence. I'm rebuilding, I told them. Not EmotiSense exactly, but its true successor, with the original vision and values intact. One by one, they signed on, willing to take the risk based on faith in me and frustration with what Stratuspark had become. We set up a temporary workspace in a co-working facility, just one block from Stratuspark's offices, close enough to send a message. I named the new venture Empath IQ Labs, a nod to both our emotional intelligence roots and the high technical standards we would maintain. Our mission statement was simple: authentic emotional intelligence for human-centered organizations. Word spread quickly through the industry. Former clients began reaching out, asking when we might be operational. Several expressed frustration with Stratuspark's recent product changes and support issues. I was careful not to disparage my former company, but I didn't hide the fact that we were building something truer to the original vision. The pressure on Stratuspark mounted from multiple directions. The legal challenge threatened their core technology. Key engineers had departed. Clients were expressing concern, and now a potential competitor was forming, led by the original founder, just down the street. 3 weeks into the legal battle, I received an unexpected call from Raymond Ellis, the Stratuspark partner who had orchestrated the original acquisition. This has gone far enough, he said without preamble. Colin mishandled the situation badly. The board was not fully informed of the circumstances of your termination until after the fact. I doubted that was true, but I let him continue. We'd like to meet and discuss a resolution that works for everyone. The meeting was set for the following morning at a neutral location, a conference room at our mutual bank's downtown office. I arrived with Max and 2 other attorneys he'd brought onto the case. Stratuspark sent Raymond, their lead counsel, and a financial officer I didn't recognize. Notably absent was Colin. Raymond opened with an olive branch. First, I want to apologize for how your departure was handled. It was unprofessional and unbecoming of our organization. I nodded but said nothing, waiting. We've reviewed the situation, and while we maintain that Clause 9C was never intended for this type of scenario, we recognize that the letter of the agreement may support your position. Max leaned forward slightly, and we're prepared to offer a settlement. $5 million for a full release of claims and a permanent transfer of all rights related to EmotiSense to Stratuspark. I almost laughed out loud. $5 million for technology now valued at over $100 million. that formed the core of their entire business. "That's not going to work," I said flatly. The negotiation that followed was intense. They gradually increased their offer, 8 million, then 12, then 20. I refused each time, not because the amounts weren't significant, but because this had stopped being about money. "Here's my counter-offer," I said finally. "I exercise my repurchase rights as written. EmotiSense LLC reclaims its intellectual property. StrataSpark Analytics can continue operating with a new, properly negotiated license agreement, with terms that reflect the technology's true value and that cannot be terminated without mutual consent." Their lawyer scoffed. "You want us to pay you royalties on technology we've developed for 2 years? You've packaged and marketed it," I corrected. "The core algorithms, the parts that actually work and create value, those are still mine. And yes, I want fair compensation for their use." The meeting ended in a stalemate, but I could see the calculation happening behind Raymond's eyes. Fighting me in court would be expensive and risky. Even if they won, the disruption and uncertainty would damage client relationships and market position. And with each passing day, EmpathIQ Labs grew stronger, a viable competitor built by the same team that had created their core technology. 2 days later, Raymond called again. "We have board approval for a new proposal," he said. "Colin has stepped down as CEO, effective immediately. We'd like to discuss your return to the company in a leadership role, with a revised equity structure and clear authority over product direction." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "That ship has sailed, Raymond. I'm not coming back." His sharp intake of breath told me this wasn't the response they'd expected. They thought I was fighting for position or revenge. They still didn't understand that I was fighting for the integrity of what I'd built. "Then what do you want? Name your price." I already did. EmotiSense returns to my ownership. You get a non-exclusive license to continue using it under fair terms. Or we can let the courts decide. Another 2 days passed. Major clients began quietly reaching out to EmpathIQ, asking about migration timelines and compatibility. Novotel, Gravitas Health, and Blue Halo, all enterprise clients who valued the technical excellence that had been sacrificed for marketability, made it clear they were prepared to switch providers when we were ready. Sabrina, desperate to control the narrative, published a tone-deaf LinkedIn post about emotional regulation in female leadership, thinly veiled as commentary on the situation. The backlash was swift and brutal, with industry leaders and diversity advocates condemning the sexist implications. Colin appeared on an obscure tech podcast, attempting to frame the conflict as a founder who couldn't scale with the business. The stock price dropped 15% the following day as investors questioned the company's leadership and technical foundation. The end came more quickly than I expected. Raymond called on a Friday afternoon, his voice resigned. "The board has authorized me to accept your terms. License agreement, royalty structure, full acknowledgement of your ownership of the core technology. We'd like to move quickly to minimize disruption." Victory should have felt sweeter. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of vindication, exhaustion, and an odd sense of anticlimax. The fight had consumed me for weeks, and now it was over, not with a dramatic courtroom revelation, but with a business decision made in a boardroom. The final agreement was signed the following Monday. EmotiSense LLC, now fully under my control, licensed its technology to StrataSpark Analytics for a 12% royalty on all revenue. A fortune given their current client base, but fair considering the technology's central role in their products. More importantly, the agreement acknowledged me as the original creator and gave me approval rights over significant changes to the core algorithm. Never again would my life's work be turned into a cartoon character without my consent. With the legal battle resolved, I turned my full attention to EmpathIQ Labs. We leased proper offices in a renovated factory building, just far enough from StrataSpark to avoid daily awkward encounters, but close enough to make a point. The cashier's check for $1 that had changed everything was framed and hung prominently in our main conference room. Our first product launch came 6 months later, an emotional intelligence platform focused on healthcare communications. helping providers identify patient distress signals that might otherwise be missed. True to our roots, the interface was clean and functional, with no cartoon mascots or simplified emotion buckets. We let the technology's performance speak for itself. The industry took notice. Former clients migrated to our platform, attracted by the technical excellence and the authentic vision. New clients, particularly in healthcare and crisis services, appreciated our focus on nuanced emotional understanding rather than simplified customer satisfaction metrics. We grew steadily, deliberately avoiding the hypergrowth trap that had corrupted Stratuspark's priorities. When we did take investment, it was on terms that preserved our mission and values. I maintained controlling interest and made sure every investor understood and supported our vision. A year after the settlement, I was invited to speak at Tech Evolve, the same conference where Colin had once erased me from EmotiSense's story. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of founders and technologists, I finally told the full story. The homelessness, the breakthrough, the betrayal, and the redemption. I held up a framed dollar bill, the one I'd used to buy back my company. The moral isn't that you should hide clauses in your contracts. I told the rapt audience, the moral is that you should never underestimate someone who has already survived living in their car to build something they believe in. What looks like defeat to others might just be a temporary setback to them. The applause was deafening. But the most satisfying moment came later, at the reception, when a young woman approached me with fire in her eyes. "I'm sleeping on my friend's couch while bootstrapping my cybersecurity startup," she confided. "Everyone says I should take the first acquisition offer that comes along. Your story changed my mind." I took her business card and promised to meet for coffee. As she walked away, I realized that the true victory wasn't the company I'd reclaimed or even the new one I'd built. It was the permission I'd given others like me, outsiders, true believers, people for whom creation is not just a business but a calling, to stand their ground and fight for what they've built. The path from that rainy night in my van to this moment had been longer and stranger than I could have imagined. I'd lost everything and taken it back with a single dollar and an obscure legal clause. But the real lesson was simpler. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. My name is Madeline Rivers. I built something valuable from nothing, lost it through betrayal, and reclaimed it through persistence. My company's current slogan says it all: backed by grit, bought for $1. And I'm just getting started.